in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the guitarist and vocalist. It's the one and only Alfie Agnew, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff, and also all about his life in music. Has had lots of sort of musical adventures in different bands and combos, plus this latest one, which is Professor and the Madman. They did an album about 5 years ago which came out, and also a new one which is coming out very soon, which is going to be titled, he says, 12 Strings and a Tambourine and Tambourines. So this is the interview with Alfie. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Alfie, it's over to you.
Wow. Well, so I grew up in a musical family, and there was always music happening, and I was the last of four children. So I didn't have to do a lot of discovering. There was already a lot of stuff happening around me. So there are these things called baby books. You probably have something like that in the UK as well, where, your parents will keep a sort of a scrapbook of and notes of all these things when you're a child, too young to do yourself. And one of the things I noticed in my baby book is that, bands that I responded to well as an infant were the Beatles, the Kinks, Joe Cocker, because I was born in '69, so you can kind of get an idea of some of the music that was around. There was some others as well, but when I first started forming memories, the Beatles were always happening. The Beatles, the Monkees, a lot of '60s British invasion stuff, and sort of kind of pop. And then I remember prog hit our house pretty strongly. The prog rock. So, and to this day, I'm a big fan of ELP. They're probably my favorite of the prog stuff.
Okay.
Absolutely the sweet and Bowie and glam stuff, T-Rex for sure.
So your brothers, I'm kind of curious, because I'm the youngest of three, and my older brother, 7 years older, his period was prog rock. And so when he was at that age in the 70s, was getting prog rock records. And I came from quite a working class family, so we didn't really, I think my parents, when they got married, had to, sell everything, including the record player. So a record player appeared back in the house in the early 70s with a few records. And then my brother started getting albums and said, forbid me to go into his room to play them. So obviously I would go into his room and play these records. And they were the kind of Yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, Barclay James Harvest, and the solo work of Rikk Wakeman. So prog rock, I kind of found it, and I had to, it was a big secret because I couldn't tell him what I was doing. But I was quite obsessed with it and was very excited. So you had a slightly similar moment with prog rock, which during, was it the 70s? No, it had been... Was it late 70s, early 80s, your prog rock kind of discovery?
I would say I was actually quite young. So I'd say like mid 70s. So I was probably 5, 6 years old, which sounds a little strange. But again, there was music was just sort of always happening, either playing music, listening to music, reading music magazines, dressing up like Kiss and playing air guitar to records, things like that. That's what we did. That was like... And so I and my brothers, it sounds like I had a little easier. They were always pulling me in. So I would, Rikk, my oldest brother, would let me in his room, which he had, blacklight posters and strobe lights, all sorts of 70s stuff. The blacklight velvet posters. I don't know if you remember those.
Yes.
And, he would just throw music on. And he'd say, "Hey, Alfie, come check out this, new Yes album or something." So I was, learning about all that and getting exposed to all that quite young. A lot of the prog stuff was early 70s and into mid 70s. So I was probably a couple years later than when it came out. But I certainly remember, King Crimson and all that stuff, being some of my earliest musical memories. Yeah.
Yes, and that's quite interesting because, slightly jumping ahead, because your new album, listening to it, it had elements to me anyway. It had it's quite it's a very conceptual feeling piece with quite a narrative, and there were kind of elements that reminded me of people like Alan Parsons, and I suppose that a lot of that kind of the essence kind of underneath it was one of like, oh yes, this feels kind of like very learned musicians. You know what I mean? It wasn't that kind of, some people who've studied and read books and have sort of put this into music rather than the punk kind of format, punk musician thing, or indie pop. But there's definitely elements of that within the new album, isn't there?
Certainly. Absolutely. I think this album was probably our most ambitious, but it isn't like we sat around and said, let's do something really lofty. I think it's just sort of where the evolution has been. I think, so this Seance will be our fourth record, if you don't count the live album. And I would say the first one we did, called Good Evening, Sir, is a bit like Seance in a way, but I think Seance is much more polished than our first effort. I think another thing is Sean's very influenced by the sort of 70s and 80s Pink Floyd.
Right.
I certainly love that stuff as well, but I tend to probably cling more to the Syd Barrett type stuff. But I think the combination you can see in a song, like we have a song called Greetings from the Other Side, which I think has, some of the real good Pink Floyd influence in there. So it just was a sort of a natural progression of where we're going. Some of the stuff we're already, looking forward to the next album, and it's a little different than Seance. So
So when did you sit down to start, the process of, say writing, bringing the music together, before even getting into the studio? When what sort of time period was that? Well,
let's see. I think so Sean and I are always sharing sort of musical ideas, so I'll just call him up randomly and say, hey, Sean, check this out, and put the phone, by my guitar or piano and just kind of say, is this cool idea I have? And then I'll explain a little bit to him, and he'll go, oh yeah, I get it. And you could also do X, Y, Z. And then the, kind of the collaboration and the ideas start running. And so we're kind of doing that all the time. And then, we talk about ideas for records. For example, there's a song off Seance called Time Machine, which has, sort of a part A, and then part B of the song is Man with Nothing to Lose. And there's a whole story there. We were actually planning on doing the album based around that.
Right.
Sort of narrative. But the Seance story, when that song came up, that just sort of outran the Time Machine idea. And so hence we ended up going with the whole Seance story. So we have these ideas going on all the time. We really think very visually with our music, and in particular with our lyrics. It's almost soundtrack like.
Yes, it definitely has that quality, as well as kind of musical theatre at times. I mean, I could imagine it being sort of adapted into sort of a play in a lot of places. Because I also, one of the albums I'd forgot about, but talking to you, I just remembered War of the Worlds was a really big album, which was, albums were always big because buying them was quite a thing, and that was a vinyl record, and you couldn't just kind of flick through it and think, oh, I'm not that keen into it. In it, you would, you'd pay $3.99, $4.99. You're going to play that record for a year, regardless if you liked the damn thing or not. Let's face it. And eventually, you would make yourself like it. Apart from one or two records, which were just they were just a mistake. But yes, the War of the World. So that this definitely lends itself to sort of a sort of theatrical piece. I mean, were you within your sort of repertoire when you were growing up? Was musical theatre or soundtracks something that were also like your parents might have been into?
I would say more the soundtrack side. A musical theater is interesting to me, but that's something more I picked up just sort of, being at a university, and where there's all sorts of, opportunities to experience the arts. But soundtracks were big. Obviously the Who soundtracks, were very big during my formative years. Quadrophenia, Tommy. I think a lot of the 70s stuff had that built in. I mean, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, really, it wasn't a but you can kind of think about it that way. A lot of Bowie's stuff, like early stuff like Ziggy and Diamond Dogs, had a, almost a soundtrack type thing going to them. The ELP stuff as well. If you think of like Brain Salad Surgery and the Carnival 9, 1, 2, 3, the Welcome Back My Friend stuff. The first King Crimson album, In the Court of the Crimson King, was very kind of visual, if like, just because the music was so moody, and then the lyrics would kind of really get the imagination going. So I think a lot of my exposures to the 70s stuff, even going back to the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Magical Mystery Tour. I mean, every time I listened to those albums, there was a movie going in my head. It was vague, but it was there.
Yeah. So with the lyrics for this one, are they, I mean, is it kind of a bit tricky to answer, but are they in the kind of third person but with quite a personal feeling behind them? Because kind of, listening to the record and sort of reading the lyrics, it does seem to have an existential quality of longing and loss, as well as a romantic melancholia of sort of getting older and old souls and sort of what's it all about.
Absolutely. I'm glad that kind of came through because, I mean, I think both Sean and I kind of think about these things. I could be probably a little bit more guilty, of thinking like this. I reflect a lot. I'm a thinker, and to use the word existentialism, I have studied and read a lot of that stuff, and I think that's sort of part of it. I think it resonates with my personality. And a lot of that comes through. But it's funny. I think that's something that I've done my whole life, not just now that I'm, sort of breaking into the 50s. For example, the song Child's Eyes is an older song. It's a song I wrote, I want to say in the 90s. Maybe even before that, maybe even late 80s. I mean, it's been substantially reworked. Certainly Sean's added a lot to it. So I wouldn't say it's just, sort of an old song that we recorded. But even then, I mean, if you think of the lyrics a bit and the melancholy aspect and the reflectiveness of it, that's always been kind of a part of me, I guess, for some reason.
Yes. Well, I interesting. I love, romantic melancholy as my go-to emotional state. And so when I was very young, for some reason, there was the Carpenters record in the house. And I've always loved the Carpenters. I think lyrically they're so beautiful. And, it's no wonder I grew up to love, Joy Division and the Smiths during the 80s, because it was all about sort of loneliness and heartbreak and sort of alienation, really, isn't it? Let's face it.
Absolutely.
The line I say goodbye to love, no one seems to care if I should live or die, I think is like, I don't think anyone's really beaten that in a long way. That's my take.
I absolutely agree.
Yes.
I think we're similar souls in that way, because all three of those bands you mentioned, I mean, Karen Carpenter, in my opinion, has the best voice ever to grace the planet. Just the way she can tap into that feeling, holy cow, fantastic stuff.
Yes. So when you were, because I'm sort of curious on the 80s, but just on the lyric one, you've got an album, a track called "Man with Nothing to Lose," haven't you? On the and you reference the Dam in there, don't you, as well? Is it?
Yes.
Which is quite, for those who are listening. Yes, because the drummer, Rat Scabies, isn't he?
Yep. And the bass player as well. Yeah.
So when did you, decide, so what's the story with that? And did that sort of come, before or after he appeared in the band?
Yeah. So yeah. Both Sean and I have been so musical our whole lives. It's really been sort of the main constant. We have by now acquired quite a few influences. When he and I hit our early teen, maybe even tweener years, probably tweener years at least, because I remember listening to early punk stuff in the 70s when I was still in the digits. But certainly when we started hitting the tweener years into teenage years, punk was our thing. And so that's late 70s in through the 80s. And one of the bands that that stuck. I first discovered the Damned. Actually, I think my brother, as usual, turned me on to the Damned, the first album. When I was a little kid, I think it was probably might have been released in '76, but I think it got to the West Coast and into my hands by maybe '77, '78. And as a little kid, I remember the cover of the Damn 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 album, where Captain is covered in cake and Scabies is pretending or actually licking his cakey hair. And
Yes.
as a little kid, I just thought, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing. Let's listen to it, And, the intensity of the music and the craziness of the music just really resonated with me, as did a lot of punk. Just the energy, the outrageousness. You think of cartoons for little kids. They're outrageous on purpose because that resonates with kids. But the Damned was a band that, among all the punk bands, especially the ones that define the sort of the first wave, the Damned always stuck with me. They've always been one of my favorite bands, and they've been one of these bands that never, for some reason, they just didn't get stuck in an era. They've always been able to evolve. And I think Professor and the Madman takes huge inspiration from that, because we're always doing, well, first of all, we do whatever we want. And I see the Damned doing that. They did the punk album, and then, Machine Gun Etiquette was quite bold, for an early punk band. Then you get into the Black Album and Strawberries and Phantasmagoria and Anything and Beyond. And, they just kept doing what they wanted to do. So they were defining sort of their future, rather than, oh gosh, we got a little notoriety in this genre, so we have to keep trying to recreate that. I think vast majority of bands get stuck doing that, and I understand why, but it's really a shame, because that's not what got them the notoriety in the first place. It was sort of being individual, and being sort of honest about what they truly want to do.
Yes, well, I think it's also about being able to evolve and realising you need to take a risk, otherwise you might as well just call it a day and forget it. Which in a way, bands like, the Sex Pistols, that's a whole nother chapter, isn't it? But they did one album and that was it. Whereas it is a shame when people, obviously they did various solo stuff. But then, so you're right, because my main person is David Bowie, whose 60 stuff was, pretty awful, really. But then his 70 stuff was incredibly all over the shop, and at the time, people around him, and especially his manager, must have been pulling their hair out, because they must have thought, this, David, stick to the script, mate. You get there's an album a year, and it's all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason. So it is interesting when people do that and take those kind of risks.
I love that about Bowie, and he's probably my number one example of how to really do it, because he was at home in every decade, and that is so remarkable. You have to be super talented and very just worldly and smart, to be able to pull that off. So he was very punk in his attitude. He was going to do what he was going to do, and whether that was disco or glam or whatever, he just did it, and that's I have so much respect for that. Just to sort of circle back to the Damned thing, because I realized I didn't answer your question. The influences on Pat M from the Damned are quite large. You think about the Black Album is very soundtrack-like. Some of the stuff that David Vanian was getting into with Curtain Call. I think you can see a lot of parallels there. But punk-wise, in terms of the roots, I think the Damned really are it. For Sean and I. And so a lot of the stuff that we wrote, we had sort of Rat and Paul Gray as a rhythm section kind of in mind, like naturally. It's like, okay, oh man, if those guys were playing on this song of ours, it would just sound perfect. And we're not as good as them at drums and bass by any stretch. And so therefore we can't quite fake it and pull it off. But as fate would have it, we crossed paths with Rat, and he ended up recording one of the songs off the first album with us while we were making the album, and it was a very, positive experience for everybody. Everyone had a good time, and so he ended up doing the whole album with us, and has been our drummer the whole time. Whereas with Paul Gray, we crossed paths with him prior to the third album, and a similar story happened, and he joined us for the third album and ever since. So it was just really, really good luck for us, and I think part of that is it was a good fit because those guys were such big influences for us, so they slotted in quite naturally.
Yes, absolutely. And they must have quite a gravitas, actually, aren't they? Because they're a slightly different generation. And all great bands have an amazing rhythm section, from the Stones to Sly and Robbie, the reggae people, to, Fleetwood Mac with, John McVie and Mick Fleetwood. And, the Smiths had an amazing rhythm section that complemented Mara and Morrissey as well. So you must have felt really pleased to have got something that gave you that kind of creative sort of edge, really.
Certainly, no doubt.
And also, you must, as a fan, think, God, these guys, look at the CVs on these guys and the records they've played.
Yeah. No, I would like to try to play it cool, but it's pretty amazing. So when we crossed paths with Rat, it was at the small club. He was out visiting in Southern California. He has a lot of friends and connections out here. And he just happened to be at a club where Sean and I were playing, and we did an encore. We were in Smash It Up was what we were going to do, and we knew Rat was there because he was visiting a friend of ours, and so usually it's Sean, because he has a lot more guts than I do. Kind of said, hey, why don't you pop up here and do it with us? And quite surprisingly, he's like, yeah, sure, all right, and. Again, having been massive Damn fans, Sean and I were just, hopefully we didn't look silly, with ear-to-ear grins and.
Yes, absolutely. It's amazing. Yes, because actually one of the Damned albums that I personally thought was amazing was it Strawberries that he was also on?
Yeah.
That was their one in '82, and it had a track which I thought was stunning called, was it called Generals or something?
Yes, Generals, absolutely, a fantastic song.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a much more obscure one that he was on, I think this is Paul, there was a guy, I think he was a bit of I don't know if he was a one-hit wonder, but he was called Larry Wallace, and he did a track called Police Car that was on one of the Stiff compilations, that little record label. Yes, so yeah, they're sort of, the CV between those two must have just been an incredible thrill.
It was, for sure.
Yeah, and so actually this started with that line in the song. So when you wrote, you referenced the Damned in one of the songs, you obviously realised that they were part of the band.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably Sean has a very wry sense of humor. He it's why I like hanging out with him so much, because he's very different from me in that way. A very funny sense of humor. And so, yeah, the Paul and Rat had already been playing with us for a while by the time we wrote that song. That song was one of the, I would say, not later songs to appear on the album, but earlier in the songwriting process. And it's just a nod to how much, Sean and I admire and, what the Damned meant to us in the 80s, and how much they influenced us. So yeah, we didn't even tell them we were going to throw that in there.
Yes.
I wouldn't have caught it yet.
It would have been a nice touch. So because I'm always been obsessed with the 80s. So when you were a really young kid, you were sort of already in a band in sort of 86. This was D.I, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the first real band I was in, and how do I define real? Well, probably that actually played a show that wasn't at my own house.
Yes.
Was a band called The Attack, which was an early punk band. I was, I think, 11, and I played drums in that band. And we played this local punk club called the Cuckoo's Nest. So that was probably my first band, and that was maybe 81. 82, 81. And, I was still sort of developing my chops as a musician. But I would say the first band that really made some noise, and had a pretty good following that I was in was probably D.I, which I joined, I want to say 84, 85.
Yes.
And it was just the zeitgeist. We really resonated in the punk scene down here and got quite popular. It was pretty much D.I and Social Distortion were the two main bands at the time. And I have to say, we probably were getting better crowd responses than Social Distortion at the time, even though we were usually the supporting act for a headlining Social Distortion. I think what was going on was, punk started becoming more hardcore, and we were probably a little bit more hardcore than Social Distortion. I mean, of course, Social Distortion subsequently reinvented themselves and became quite commercially successful, which was fantastic.
Yes. And also, what's also boggling, because as you realise, the UK is tiny, isn't it? You could fit it in your back pocket. Whereas with America, it's every place has its scene, doesn't it? And it's a country within itself. Like, I've been recently looking at a lot of the sort of bands from that Texas or in Georgia, Athens, like REM and various other bands from that sort of scene as well. And then, you get the obvious ones in New York, and you had the sort of, CBGBs and the Mud Club and Max's Kansas City. And then obviously on the West Coast, Orange County, you had your own sort of punk scene, and then Seattle sort of appeared sort of probably towards the end of that decade. But with a lot of people that I've interviewed from that, they often said, we toured this, and this, but we didn't go up there and around there because that's just even too far for us. This is our country. So, so did you is it the case then that each kind of area does have its very sort of closed place, and to sort of break out of that and then tour the different sort of capitals or towns of America is quite a big trip?
Oh, no doubt about it. That's what you're suggesting is pretty much spot on. You kind of have your micro region, if you will, which for us was Orange County. But Orange County is always the little brother of Los Angeles.
Yes.
But the character of the scenes in Orange County versus LA, there's quite a big difference. And I think it's just, LA is much more urban. Orange County is much more suburban. And in some sense, I think that the punk scene in Orange County had a certain intensity that LA's didn't. I'm sure people could argue the other way around. But it's a lot harder to be a punk in a suburban conservative place like Orange County. It's extremely hard. And when you're Orange County is popular for being politically and socially conservative. It's very well known for that, unfortunately. And so there's a lot less tolerance and a lot more angst, for people who just aren't the type to fall in line.
Yes.
So some pretty intense punk has come out of Orange County, compared to Los Angeles. But I think there's a California-ness to both. You certainly have the surf aspect. The Beach Boys were in kind of suburbs of LA, but in LA County, a lot of Dick Dale and a lot of the surf rock stuff was from the Orange County beach areas. And so I'd probably say that the Orange County scene was a little bit more skate surf oriented, a little bit more suburb oriented, where you had things, bands like Fear, Black Flag, Circle Jerks, which were more sort of urban LA. They had a lot in common with New York from that point of view. But the sound was still kind of related.
Yes, and during that sort of decade, because I was sort of obsessed with indie pop and sort of put down between the years of 83 to 87, which are the years of the Smiths, and then but then in America, we started getting very influenced by people like Sonic Youth and the Husker Du and Big Black, and then sort of the Butthole Surfers. So that kind of sound started to come in, and then sort of around 87, the ecstasy kind of world started to appear, and then there was the sort of dance scene that started, and then Seattle sort of came in towards 89, 90 as well. So, but then you had sort of gone into another band called the Adolescents at that period, hadn't you?
Yep, that's correct. So Adolescents, it was actually the second incarnation, the second edition of the Adolescents. The Adolescents were one of the earlier Southern California punk bands that really got some note. So they were around in, I would say, 1980, 1981, 1982. So very early 80s. Both my older brothers were in that band. And their first album, which is usually called the Blue Album, is to this day is a punk favorite for people who are familiar with the Southern California scene. Songs like Amoeba and Kids of the Black Hole, are anthems. And so they had broke up, and the sort of second version, and it was the original lineup, but the original lineup didn't last sort of the preliminary formation of the second edition. And in particular, my brother Frank, who's in between Rikk and I, he said, okay, this is fine, but I'm not really into it. And so I took his place, and I was in DI at the time. So this is probably 86, 87, 88, that timeline. And so I was in both those bands at that point. And we recorded the album Brats and Battalions, which was the second Adolescents album. And I don't think it quite had the success of the first one. The first one had sort of a magic to it, and the timing. But it was well received. But I wasn't in that band for too long, probably about maybe a little over a year.
Yes. So as the 80s progressed, were you getting tired with it, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I graduated high school in 86, and so I had to start thinking about, what am I going to do with my life type thing? Am I going to just continue to do music? Am I going to, and I had become interested in school subjects probably in 85. I really didn't even, I wanted to drop out of high school. My father wouldn't allow it, and he could be persuasive. So, to be fair though, he's like, look, just get your diploma. I don't care if you're, getting great grades, breaking records, but don't be a fool, get the piece of paper. And he was right, 100% right, of course. But because it wasn't that hard to do that. But I was so into music that it just felt like, wow, my gosh, I'm all this time during the day when I could be doing music. But I started growing up a lot. I would say starting 85, I started maturing, and I started looking around me, and DI had and the Adolescents had made some noise, and so we started getting into the music business side of things a bit, because we had record companies and we had managers, and I started to see how slimy the music business was.
Yes.
Which turned me off quite a bit, so it really takes some of the fun and the shine off of being a musician, and having success. And so a lot of what I was experiencing at that point was rubbing me wrong. I really started getting a little tired of a lot of the, sort of the partying aspects of it, and things like that. It just was so narrow. So I started thinking very carefully of, I felt like I was in a fork in the road. Am I going to continue, doing this punk thing with these bands who are admittedly doing well, but I don't see them really ever being able to capitalize on it, because I just don't think there was enough maturity and sensibility to be able to do that. I think we were always going to sabotage ourselves because we were just kids wanting to have fun.
Yes.
So I didn't see that as a very tantalizing future. I had become very interested in physics, and so I thought, I think I'll go to university and pursue that. I actually did both for about 2 years. And to be fair, the music was paying for my college, which is usually not the case.
No.
But things were going so well with the music, but I could see it wasn't going well. So at some point when we were going on tours and I couldn't, get the train home to take an exam in time, and it became, or I was maybe doing it on no sleep. it just became untenable. I had to decide one or the other, and so I decided to leave music behind.
Yes, and it's an interesting time because, as with a lot of people, mostly they don't really regret it because they realise there was never going to be any chance. But then a few people go, oh, God, actually a year later or 2 years later something happens, like, suddenly the Seattle grunge scene. Did you occasionally listen to that and thought, oh, we could have almost been there? You were still, that age group where you weren't going to look too old to be on stage, bashing out something like Nevermind.
Right. Yeah. I had thought a little bit about it, but not too much. I was so happy with what I was doing, actually. And I did listen to a lot of that Seattle stuff and liked it. Obviously Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots. I dug all that stuff. And I had no doubt in my mind that, I could have been involved and I could have contributed to something that would be just as cool and just as accessible and just as attractive, but again, having firsthand experience with the music business, particularly back then, I mean, there wasn't really much of an internet. There wasn't much digital recording. There's just so much that's not in your control that
Yes.
I didn't feel like it was me that held me back. I just realized it's lottery tickets in popular music. It's lottery tickets. It's not who's the most talented, who's the most this or that. It's you got to have good timing.
Yes, well, actually, it's interesting because I was going to say timing, and then you got there. Because there's a few people I spoke to. There was a guy called Richard Strange, the Doctors of Madness, I think that was the band, and he came along about, I suppose, 1974, 75, and he said we were 2 years too early for punk, but everybody in the audience came to see us and formed punk bands and took our ideas. But we were sort of. They were just a bit too old. They felt too old, and they'd just been in the game for just that little bit too long. But and he mentioned a lot about the timing of music. That sure. I suppose he's felt that his career, he's kind of been very influential, and he's done a lot of good stuff. But he's never hit the gold moment. He's never kind of the numbers never came up, and but he's happy with his lot, and it's turned out okay. But yeah, it is about timing, really, isn't it? Because there was a few bands who I think came along. In the indie pop world, and it's a bit like, actually, the party's slightly over now. It's kind of done. We're sort of on to the next thing, because that 16 to 18-year-old fan wants their scene. They don't really want the scene that's just gone ahead, gone before them. They want their music that's the first single, the first album, not the third or fourth album from a band who's, swanning around and looking quite wealthy, really.
Right. Right, and I don't blame them one bit. I think most of the movements, the music movements and things like that are. I mean, you're going to get them because of young people wanting their own thing, and they absolutely should. I think it's cool if young people can look back and say, "Hey, you guys did some cool stuff. I like this. I like that." But they I think kids need to sort of create their own world, and I think music is a big part of that. So, yeah, I totally agree, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, absolutely. I mean, yes, because they're the years where you consume it and you listen to it all day. And frankly, now, we worry about our gutters and drains, don't we, when you get to a certain age, and fence panels falling down, which is a bit different. You're not so worried about the B side of a single. But then, so after, you had this, very academic kind of period and sort of focused on that. So then what drew you back into the music world again? Thinking, actually, this is quite a nice, I might, do another fork in the road.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So, I mean, I certainly listened. So even though I got out of the music business and I didn't play my instruments nearly as much as I had before, I still listened to tons of music. I have sort of gotten into lots of different genres. I think about the same time as I got serious about Practical Matters, I also started realizing, okay, I love punk. The punk philosophy, as I understand it, is a permanent part of me. But it's okay to like bands that aren't punk. And it's okay to, when you're a teenager, you get very narrow, perhaps, at least I did. And because, it's this loyalty thing, I'm a punk and you're loyal to punk, but then you start growing up a little bit, and you start going, oh, hang on, some of that old jazz stuff is quite cool. And, wow, Beethoven had some passion. That's pretty cool. So there's stuff in every possible genre that I like and appreciate now. And so I think a lot of those years was more me acquiring and listening, and becoming more knowledgeable about music, both in a technical sense and in an appreciation sense. So I still was very much consuming music, but it was, my academic pursuits took me around the country a bit. But as it turned out, I ended up returning to Southern California for my permanent job, my university job, and which wasn't necessarily planned. It just kind of happened. And that put me back in the geographical area where music happened and where I had somewhat of a reputation and a lot of former colleagues. And by the time the word got out, which was probably a decade into it, that I was actually back, kept my head down. So my old mates from DI, were doing some work in a studio and found me via Facebook. And they talked me into coming down to the studio and laying some tracks. And once I picked my guitar back up, it's just so hard to put it down. It's so in my DNA. And I had so much fun, right, hanging out with those folks. We just kept going from there. And one thing led to another, led me to reconnecting with Sean Elliott and doing Professor and the Madman, which really is a project that Sean and I would have and should have done back in the early 90s when I played in DI with him. I rejoined DI in the early 90s doing a European tour and some US stuff as well. And at that point, Sean Elliott was in DI. That's how we got to know each other. And he and I think, were very different than a lot of our peers in terms of our influences and our interest in playing non-punk music and or at least not non-punk. I mean, punk, again, is something I love and will always be a part of what I do, but maybe expanding, sort of what we're willing to do, what we have the guts to do. But it just, the timing wasn't good for that collaboration. But the Professor and the Madman collaboration is making good on that, which we should have done in the late 80s. And maybe that collaboration would have been something that was commercially viable. That's interesting to me.
And did you enjoy your European tour with DI?
Oh, it was amazing. It was so awesome. I mean, it was hectic. We were, driving hundreds of kilometers a day, playing a show and sometimes two, and then sometimes out and on the road the same night. It was really hectic, as of course tours are, but we were young and up to it. It was fantastic. We went all the way to Malmo, Sweden, and all the way down as far as, Rome in Italy. It was awesome. The only bad thing about it is our UK shows got canceled, so we didn't end up playing the UK.
God, what a shame. That is amazing.
Oh, I was so bummed. Yeah.
It must have been very difficult. And obviously, there's always kind of tricky stuff, because obviously was it the drummer in your band DI got arrested, didn't he, as well, which was another tricky subject, isn't it?
I don't. Not on that tour. So the tour, I think, was 1990. So the drummer didn't get arrested on that one. I know they had been back, since that tour. We did have our bass player break his arm skateboarding in Switzerland.
Yes.
And
God.
we had some issues with the law. We had a very interesting day, with the French Border Patrol. I'm not sure what their proper name is. We were coming into France on the south side, and they clearly didn't care to let us in the country. So yeah, they tore our bus apart and made us do all sorts of unpleasant things. So, but fortunately, nobody arrested that I can remember anyway. Who knows?
Yes, it's always tricky. I mean, because that's kind of one of the things that the dynamics of a band is always tricky. And so I think when people in later life, once they've done other things and they think, I'd really like to do music but without the stuff that sometimes was the good stuff, but sometimes was also a bit messy, and the dynamics and just being nice to each other. And I think that's the other thing that I've really got from doing all these interviews with people, is that it's like, can we just do it but have a nice time and give each other a bit of a break at times, because we're all going to be a bit stressed about something else happening in life, and things happened. And I could imagine, because it's you and Sean, but then these other two characters who obviously are part of the band but from a slightly different age group and generation, must help with the dynamic to think, well, actually, they're not like we're all the same age and we're all going to push each other's buttons, because actually these guys are from quite a different, generation, really.
Certainly. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, this, Pat M, I mean, it's been nothing but smooth. Everybody's in it because they want to be. Everybody has, full artistic control of what they do. There's a ton of mutual respect. I haven't been in a band this talented and this pleasant. Just to give you an example of kind of what you're talking about too is so I remember the very first gig on that European tour with DI. I think it was in northern Germany. I forget the name of the town. But our first show, we were at sound check. So our first sound check, and our drummer, and bass player get into a bit of an argument during sound check, and there goes the drummer flying over his kit to basically kill our bass player. This was, again, we hadn't even played one show yet. So I have to be honest, it was quite funny, but it wasn't funny, a month in of a 2-month tour.
No, it probably
so at some point, but it made for a lot of good stories. There's none of that. When we went over to the UK to play that show in London at the 100 Club with Pat M, it was just a big party. It was just a ton of fun. Everyone enjoying it. We were sitting around wondering why we weren't doing more dates. Rather than, oh God, get me home. I can't stand these people another day. Nothing like.
And sort of being able to play live. Obviously, this year has been a disaster on that front. But is it something that you still really enjoy doing if you can get the chance to?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. In sort of getting back into music, and playing live, I want to say like 2013 is when I really started doing that again. There's just nothing else in life that can give you that same sort of excitement and connection, to people. It's really exciting. And if people will have me, I'm always going to be happy to do it. But yes. COVID screwed that up.
It so screwed it up. Because the one person, I mean, we mentioned him already, David Bowie. I mean, it's interesting, his career. I mean, I know he had a bit of a hiatus when he had his health issues, and then he sort of then appeared again and done 2 more albums, including the last one, which was Black Star. So he highlighted that as an artist going from, from the sort of his 60s period right through the 70s, his songs reflected him so much, and that last album, Black Stars, certainly did, because there were sort of lyrics in it there, which is hard not to read into what was happening in his kind of health and life and death. I mean, does that also, now that you're all getting older, does that make you also reflect a bit more on what you're able to write and sort of convey and sing about?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think, you hit the nail on the head a bit when you were saying that a lot of the stuff in Seance is reflective. It's kind of looking back. And I think, you do that when you get older, and so in some sense, yeah, Seance makes that just really obvious. If you kind of pay attention to the lyrics and stuff, it makes it, I mean, you have Seance, which is, kind of the main story about a group of friends, sort of going to a seance to try to contact, friends and family that have passed away, and sort of just to give a final goodbye, to say those things that you never got a chance to say. So as you get older, more people pass away, and so this becomes something that's more on the mind and more part of your consciousness compared to when you're a kid and not even aware of your mortality. Time Machine, the song, is a bit about, gosh, not crazy about the way the world is. I wish I could go back to the 80s or somewhere that was fun for me, right? I think as you get older, you start to, your place in the world starts to get a little fuzzy. I think it's saying as much about that as anything. The world passing you by. Child's Eyes, again, is about, I guess it's not so much about being older, and maybe this is the difference that makes it clear what age I was when I wrote it, is more about, I think, losing, the innocence of your youth and sort of starting to become more cognizant of just some of the ugliness in the world that you're not as cognizant of when you're a kid. So yeah, a lot of that is in the music, and it's because of our age.
Yes, absolutely. And obviously you finished the album New World, which is kind of looking to be slightly optimistic about the planet, because as we all sort of feel like the fragility of life is getting more and more sort of in the balance. And I'm sort of reading into that. It's not that difficult, though, is it? That you're sort of also looking at the next generation and what sort of planet and what sort of place has kind of been made within our lifetime, which is a bit sort of humbling, really.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and I'm glad that's coming through. So with all the nervousness and anxiety of the first 11 songs, yes, at the end of the day. And at the end of the album, that in the fictional story, it's okay. Look, humans, you're going to get another chance. Don't screw it up, but you're going to get another chance. Of course, I don't know in reality if that's an option, if we're going to have that option. I mean, I think we should not plan on something external, just sort of, saying, okay, well, we'll clean this mess up for you and you can just start over. I think we're going to have to do that if it's going to happen. So, but I think the whole point of being anxious and concerned and nervous is in order to try to make sure there's a happy ending, or at least a happy next chapter. And so it was kind of natural to do that for the album. I mean, as sort of dark as a lot of the topics are, you always want that sunrise, and so we sort of ended up doing that with New World at the end of the album.
Yes, I'm sort of remembering that the Pink Floyd, I suppose it was their 80s album, wasn't it? The Something Cut, that one. Oh, God. The Roger Waters one, which is his last studio album, which was kind of a narrative about, I think, his dad dying in the war, actually. But there was kind of the last song, or one of the last songs, was all about a sunrise, and it was a long time ago since I listened to it, but it kind of reminds me of that kind of narrative journey that one goes through as you, as the creator and the writer, bringing this narrative together and for a conclusion, which makes it very sort of theatrical in a weird way. You can see it on stage, let's face it.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. I mean, if there were ever, somebody with the means that said, hey, we should make a movie out of this. I mean, we're already half done with it, to be quite honest.
Oh, I know. That was called The Final Cut. Brilliant. Well, I'm so pleased.
That's right. That's right.
Final Cut. So look, just lastly, or just roughly, I mean, if you could have said something to an 18-year-old self starting out in this kind of interesting creative world as well as academic, I mean, what would, if there was a few things you would love to have just said, oh, by the way, just keep an eye on that, or think about this. I just wondered what that would be.
Sure. So with regard to music?
Well, no, just life in general, actually. Just like, yeah, but obviously, directed slightly about music. But if you could have just said something to that kid starting out, whether they were just about to go on stage or they were just in the studio, and you just thought, oh, look, I know I'm an old dude, but I've had a few experiences. Sure. You could just keep an eye on this, or keep a bit of a mind open to this idea. I just wondered what it would be.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I would say go for it. I would encourage them to go for it. But in order to do that, in order to stick your neck out, you have to be kind to yourself. You have to be, try to develop a little bit of a thick skin, because don't live too safely, and I mean that just in terms of um, you know not following society's leads or what's popular, whatever. Really try to be an individual. And if an idea turns you on, run with it. Don't worry about what people say too much. If it's not a good idea, if you regret it, if you're embarrassed about it, don't worry. People aren't going to remember that. The problem is that they don't. Right? So I just being true to yourself and going for it, and being kind to yourself no matter what happens with it. I think that's it. I've done some pretty cool things. And not anything remarkable that I've done was because I worried about what other people thought, or because I was worried about failing. Becoming a PhD in mathematical physics, when I'm a first generation college student, what are the chances of that? I'm sure anyone who heard me talking about that when I was first starting out, graduating high school, especially when they saw my high school transcripts, were like, yeah, right. Good luck with that.
Yes.
So if you tell yourself no, then nothing's going to happen for sure. If you tell yourself yes, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. So I think just being optimistic and forgiving, I think it's a powerful combination.
Yes, and it is true actually what you said about, because you think that if you make some sort of mistake, it is embarrassing, a bit like falling over, but bizarrely, very few people are going to really make much of a deal of it. They've got their own trip, haven't they? But it's hard to think that you're sort of the embarrassment, being a laugh in the butt of a joke or something. It's always kind of. It makes us very self-conscious in a weird way. So I think it is kind of interesting, because actually most people won't remember it and aren't that bothered and aren't even that cruel. Perhaps some people are, but mostly people aren't. They're quite concerned if you fall over and want you to look after yourself and pick yourself up again. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's life. It's getting old. You get wiser, don't you? This is true. Anyway. True. But look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. This has been amazing. So thank you. And brilliant. I really love listening to the album over the last few days. It's been really nice. And like I said, it's sort of brought back lots of memories of other bands that I can remember. Like I said, sure. Alan Parsons, Turn of a Friendly Card? I think that was it. It was one of my favourite albums in the 80s. My brother, like I said, he was really into prog rock, so it was one of those albums he had and consumed with great enthusiasm. But yes, ELO. No, not ELO. ELP. That's the one. I think it was Tarkus was the one that I bought, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that one.
That was the one, that was such a good one. Anyway, look, I better let you get on, but thanks ever so much for your time for this. I really appreciate it, and it's been amazing.
Oh, David, I've enjoyed the conversation tremendously. It's you understand so much of what I understand, I think, largely because we're of a similar age. And it's really nice to talk to someone who also has such a profound understanding of music and the different scenes that went on. It's really fun. I really thank you for this.
Yeah, and I'll send your chap Brandy a link to the interview, and then you can always use it elsewhere, actually, because I guess it was only today I put down a date and it was like, oh my God, that's November soon. It's like, I can't believe it's already here. It's well, it's not quite, but you know what I mean. It's very close. Then we can yes. Anyway, look, good luck for the rest of the year. You've got a lot on, haven't you?
Oh, you bet. Never a dull moment.
No, I know. It's such an interesting one. Anyway, look, best of luck for the year, and hopefully we can go and play live next year, or you can. That would be good.
I would love it. Thank you so much, David.
Take care there. See you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And that was me in conversation with Alfie Agnew, talking about his life in music. This has been the C86 show. David Eastaugh. Have a great week. Stay safe.